Good afternoon. It's a few minutes after noon, and we're so glad that you're here with us for the second lecture for the Harp Professor in Residence. And we're just pleased that this has been the turnout that has been, faculty, staff, students, other individuals from the community. So thank you for your participation with us. As always, I want to make sure I thank the Harp and York families for founding the Harp Professor in Residence. They could not be with us for these two public lectures, but they send their greetings this way as well. This is actually the fourth residential scholar that we've had since the program began. We had other lectures as a part of this as kind of precursor, and then finally the endowment which they established for this particular professorship was able to become fully funded, and we moved to this particular kind of format. So we're very, very thankful to the family. The Harp Professor in Residence represents their family, particularly the Reverend Harry and Mrs. Henrietta Harp, and they were longtime pastors in the Church of God. Pastored in Georgia, Kentucky, and other places, significant individuals in the life of the church. And so their family came together to honor them and recognize them for their many years of service. And so we're just really grateful for their vision, for their thoughtfulness and planning related to a visiting professorship. It's my honor to introduce the Reverend Dr. Paulson Pulikapel. He is the 2011 Harp Professor in Residence. He is accompanied by his wife, Sheila, who is here with him during these days. Also, their daughter, Amrutha, is a student here, and I believe she's maybe connected to a few of you, but she's been on our campus for some period of time as well. Dr. Pulikapel was Dean of the Academic Affairs at Union Biblical Seminary in Pune, Maharashtra, India. Pune, India is a wonderful collegiate community. Union Biblical Seminary is a fine seminary there. Dr. Barry Ross taught there for a number of years and was a colleague of Dr. Pulikapel when Barry taught at the UBS. So we're glad again to have those kinds of connections as well. Dr. Pulikapel has been teaching in the area of biblical studies at UBS. He received his PhD from the University of Sheffield in the UK in the area of Old Testament, very specifically focusing on the Qumran text. And as Dr. Pulikapel and I have had a chance to talk a bit about this over lunch on a few occasions, he was actually handling the texts themselves, looking at those individuals who were editors, those people who were adding to the text, who were these different individuals who were connecting with these ancient manuscripts. And so that's what he brings to us today. He is also pastor of the community of the Redeemed of the church again in Pune, India. Now we were visiting the Christian Brotherhood or the Viewpoint radio station, and we were talking about languages and how many languages the Viewpoint for the Church of God is translated. And he has a potential of something like 30-some million subscribers because of his native language. Well, that kind of overshadows what we're doing a bit maybe in the Church of God with translation kind of information. So thank you for keeping it all in perspective for us, Dr. Pulikapel. Today's lecture is Apocalyptic Fantasies, the Qumran Sect, and American Imagination. What are fact, what are fantasy? If you turn on the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, at any given time throughout the week, you know that we are a culture that has become quite obsessed with apocalyptic literature, with what does that mean for end times. And Dr. Pulikapel, I've asked him actually specifically because of his work in the area of the Qumran text to come and develop this particular lecture for this particular moment. So, Dr. Pulikapel, will you come and share with us?
Thank you. And it's my privilege to be here with you, and I am so grateful to the Dean and the Harp families, the President. I want to say it again, and to my good friend David Nader, who has been working with me for more than a year, and on the various aspects of my lectureship here, the professorship here, the lectures I should do, and all that. Today I'm also delighted to have all of you I've been connecting with many people, students, and the community around, the Christian community. And we, myself and Sheila, have been trying to absorb as much as possible from the Christian community around us. And that was one of the things that we prayed. Last sabbatical I spent in California, I was absorbed into a small church where I was preaching Sunday after Sunday. And this time when we said, I don't want to preach anymore, but I want to be preached too. So we finally ended up with 2 churches in this area. And we call it a morning church and the evening church. So we go to Madison in the morning and to Grace Community Church in the evening. And I'm so glad that both pastors are here, the morning pastor and the evening pastor. And we had, and so enriched by these churches, our lives have been so blessed. And so I'm grateful for their presence as well. And one thing that I touched our lives is that yesterday I was talking to the person whom I have entrusted my church, the little small church, day before yesterday, I think. And I asked how things are going, and he asked how things are going here. And I said the faculty and people are so friendly, they pray for us, there's a lot of prayer support. And I said this is something that I do imagine in academic institution, because my experience of academic institutions is where sort of, I'm not talking about my college UBS, where spirituality and academics are in 2 watertight compartments, though there may be some connection here and there. And so that was great. Before I did my first chapel here, I had a lot of people coming to me, my office, calling me, emailing me, and whenever they met me in the corridor, they said, "We are praying for you. You are in our prayers, you are in our thoughts," and all that. Terrific support. By the second chapel, there was less prayer support. Third, now, nobody. Doesn't the Bible say that we should pray fervently, pray without ceasing, even if you don't see immediate results? People may not perform always the way we expect, but keep praying for them. Okay, Apocalyptic Fantasies and the Qumran sect and American imagination. Now, I'll read a few pages, and then I will highlight other areas. In my first lecture as Harp Professor of 2011, I invited you to see my world, the India teeming with prosperous, confident youth, and the challenges and possibilities this new generation poses. In this second one, and the last one, I tried to present to you my reading of some aspects of my host culture, the American culture. This design of 2 lectures offering 2 views, one from inside and one from outside, is something neither myself nor Dr. David Neidert, who has been in conversation with me for so many months now, ever thought of. It just happened to be so. A emic view and a etic view, from inside and outside, of an Indian culture and how an Indian looks at an American culture, the American culture. I also brings to these discussions my 3 experiences. My first experience is being a Indian, educated in a majority Hindu environment. I even attended, my undergraduate degree was in a Hindu college, run by Hindu Temple Trust. Though raised as a Christian in a pre-millennial ecclesiastical background. The second experience is being involved for 4 years in the United Kingdom, mostly in an evangelical Anglican background. That is where we went for our spiritual nourishment, and a British academic background as well. The third is my own experience of the United States through visits, long stays like this in academic institutions on my sabbatical, and exposure to American evangelical spirituality through my readings and my experiences, and friendship. Now, the proposition of this paper, I'm trying to restate something that many social scientists have already stated, that American society has a penchant for apocalypticism or end-time prophecies. This inclination for apocalyptic future history makes the American mind devour, absorb anything that has references to catastrophes, references to mysterious discoveries, and interpret them in an end-time framework. I would like to point out that at least one of these, namely the use of Qumran text in an apocalyptic framework, is unfounded, because I can be considered to be a Qumran scholar. This leads me to an inquiry why the American mind has this inclination, this obsession for end-time prophecies, more pronounced than the rest of the world, particularly other Western civilizations, Europe. Now let me clarify. When I say American, I don't mean individuals. I'm referring to a collective consciousness. It need not even be a Christian consciousness. So it can be Afro-American, it can be Hispanic, it can be white American, whatever it is. But and some of you may say, I don't belong to this description, no, it's not about me. Yes, I'm not about talking. This is a collective conscience of a nation, a group of people who has this penchant or obsession. There have been a number of discoveries, discussions that aroused the American apocalyptic imagination recently. Books and articles on the Mayan calendar, for example, supposedly predicting the end of the world in 2012. We have hardly one more year, right? Is the recent one in my memory. Now, let me be very frank. I came to know about this Mayan calendar thing from some Christian magazines in India, not any secular media. They didn't put a single word about it. And having read this in any media, print or electronic, in India, they did not. They bypassed it, for I don't know why. However, in order to illustrate how deeply the American mind is engaged in apocalyptic fantasies, I would like to take the case of the well-known Left Behind series of books, games, and related things, ties, hats, coffee mugs, and bumper stickers, and walking, all sort of products that they had. Now, the Left Behind series began appearing in 1995 till 2007, that is 12 years. In 1998, the first 4 books of the Left Behind series held the top 4 slots in the New York Times bestseller. And you know the rest of the story of how best these Left Behind series have influenced Americans. And during those days, I've been into America many times. And I have been in the airports and I have seen Left Behind books piled up on the floors, piled up on the floor, the bookstore floor, not in the shelves, because people were coming and taking it, and whenever I had a time, I had a layover, I would flip through it and I put it back, because my $15 was, I had many other things to do with that $15. Now, let me just read a quote. In other areas, such as Europe, where dispensationalism is largely non-existent, this is what an author says, the book has been less successful, as in America. It sold 65 million copies, the series, and without including the sale of the hats and coffee mugs and other related products, the stickers and all that. And it became many times the bestseller in the Time magazine. Remember that Time magazine doesn't take into account the sale of Protestant bookstores. That is where it was at the highest sale. Excluding the sale in the Protestant bookstore, still many times these books were the top selling books. Now, as I said, I'm going to show you a short clip from the History Channel where it talks about the Qumran tags. Sorry. Now, Qumran tags were discovered in 1947-48. The exact date we don't know. Ever since, these texts has fascinated us in various ways. And one of the ways is definitely, not Qumran scholars are not, but non-academic people, like filmmakers, novel writers, fiction writers, have made use of Qumran. And I just want to give an example of that and from this History Channel video.
Qumran, near the Dead Sea, the Essenes were praying for the final days to begin, so they could join forces with the armies of heaven and fight the evil rulers of the earth. Among the mysterious writings found at Qumran, known today as the Dead Sea Scrolls, is the War Rule, a detailed set of instructions for fighting the ultimate battle, when the heavenly sons of light will destroy the satanic sons of darkness.
On the day of calamity, the sons of light shall battle with the company of darkness amid the clamor of gods and men. And it shall be a time of great tribulation, from its sudden beginning until its end in eternal redemption. The Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay, the title of this film is Armageddon, and they're talking about end-time prophecies and trying to substantiate their argument there is going to be a end-time final war, and they tend to say that the Qumran text, especially the war scroll, support that view. Now that's what I would like to examine, right? Now, give me a minute and let me exit this. Yep. Going back to that. Now, this is a fragment of the war scroll. The war scroll was discovered from cave 1 of Qumran. There were 11 caves. There were many caves in the Judean desert. And you can see in the picture, here you have the caves, and then there's a valley, and across the valley there's a plateau, and on the plateau we also found in 1952 a settlement, ruins of a building complex. And this is known as the ruins of Qumran, or in Arabic we call it Kirbat Qumran. These are buildings. And we found scrolls hidden in 11 caves, 11 of the many caves there. And the war scroll was discovered from cave number 1, and also fragments from cave number 4 as well. Now, this is the condition that we found the war scroll. In order to interpret the war scroll, we need to fill in this gap. Where do we find the pieces from? Pieces can be found from Qumran cave 4, some of them. And most of them were our reconstruction. The scholars reconstructed it. Best guesses, scanners, and a lot of things that will help us, but no 100% accurate, precise construction is ever possible when there is a lacuna like that. But 19 fragments, 19 pages are available to us. It talks about a war. It's called the war rule, how to fight the war. It doesn't say final war, but it's the war between two groups of people. One group called the sons of light, the other called the sons of darkness. And how the battle has to be fought. And this has a very detailed description in this 19, how the swords have to be polished, how the scaffold has to be polished, what verses or sacred sayings must be written on it, holy unto God and all on the trumpets, and how the cavalry, the footmen should be placed, who should make the advance. In the 19 columns, it details how the war should be fought. Now, the interesting thing is that nobody wins the battle, finally. That it ends in a tie between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. But the holy angels of God will intervene at the last phase, the last stage of the war, the battle, and the tie will be broken. The sons of light will win against the sons of darkness. Okay, I don't want to go into more details than this now. Now, how do we interpret this war scroll? There are many Qumran texts. There was a copper text available to us, which is called the treasure. It talks about, from 20 yards from this house to that house, 2 tons of gold are buried. From there, 3 yards you walk and you will see 10 kilograms of silver buried and all that. That I have seen that scroll myself in my last visit to Jordan Museum in the Hashemite Kingdom. And people went around and dug all these places up. No single trace of gold or anything, precious vessels and diamonds, nothing was there. Is it fictitious writing? No, well, what are they doing? Now, there are 2 ways of understanding war scroll. One is to say this is a symbolic war, understood morally, an eternal war, moral war that is going on. That is the position most of the scholars would take. It's not about a real war. The second position, so if that is the case, if it is about a symbolic moral war, then there's no apocalypticism there, isn't it? We can't go further in the history. What History Channel is saying is unfounded because it's symbolic. It's not real. Now, let's allow the possibility it's a real war, a real battle, which the people of Qumran, the sect, the Essenes will fight against their enemies and some point in history. Let's take that possibility. If we take that possibility as well, now we have to ask a few questions. Who are their enemies? The Kittim they are talking about, the sons of light. Sometimes there's a Kittim, sometimes sons of light. And how did they understand history? So if you read other texts, like the commentaries they wrote on Habakkuk, Nahum, and all those texts that we explore those texts, for them eschatology is a realized eschatology. Let me unpack that. What they mean is that whatever the Old Testament prophecies, for example Habakkuk, is fulfilled in their time. There is no more fulfillment. So they were living the end times. Now, who are the wicked in the Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 5? The wicked in the Habakkuk book, the book of Habakkuk, is the wicked priest in Jerusalem. And we are the people who said, no, this is a very unholy priesthood, we don't have any business with them, we will withdraw to the wilderness near Dead Sea, or occupy this building or expand it by expanding it, and we'll wait for the Messiah to come. Where will the Messiah come? Messiah will be one of them. Other texts talk about. There are various interpretations possible. I'm not going to scholarly discussions here. Now, they said part of it's already fulfilled by our estrangement from the Jerusalem hierarchy. That is fulfilled. Now, the battle has to be fought. Where will this battle fought? In their own time, in their own life. And they will be the sons of darkness, sons of light, fighting against their enemies, sons of darkness. And they will win the war because the holy angels will take their side at the crucial moment, at the final round of the battle. And they will win it. Fine. Now, let's go to reality now. Now, this is the dream of the war scroll. Even if we take it as about a real war, a real battle. What's the reality? The reality is that this community withdrew from Jerusalem or somewhere else. They were against the Jerusalem establishment, especially the priestly establishment. The best guess is to say they were a priestly community waiting for the Messiah to come, and probably a Messiah from one among will be one among them. And they waited and waited, and they waited for that battle to happen, where they will be possibly actively engaged. But you know what happened? The first Jewish revolt. The Romans came and they destroyed Jerusalem by AD 70. While destroying Jerusalem, archaeological data, there is no debate about it, that this community came to an end during that campaign of the Romans. There are a lot of debates about what could be this community, this settlement, can be interpreted various ways, but nobody disagrees that the Romans destroyed this community around AD 70. There may be a lot of reasons. Probably this was a militant community and they resisted Romans. Probably while the Romans were, this community can be seen on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho You can see that. And they had, see the ruins, this is a reconstruction. You see the white part is what remains now, and the rest is reconstructed. You know, the architects have done it. Probably they thought this tower is the tower of a military post. Probably it was. Probably it was, just happened to be there. For some reason, the Romans destroyed it and they occupied parts of it for a while. Because we have found Roman archaeological, like coins and other things from this site. And they must have destroyed the caves also, because they occupied the caves for a while. They especially cave 4, they really rampaged it. Now, what I was trying to say is that the Qumran community came to an end. The final battle was fought, and they lost. The holy angels probably did not arrive in time. We don't know what happened. Even if it is about the real dream or a real vision of a community, it is not apocalyptic. There is nothing eschatological in it. Whatever the conclusion, the battle description that the war scroll talks about, even if we take it literally, about a final war, that final war is over. And the sectarians lost. Now, probably some of them must have escaped to another fort, further south, called Masada. You might have seen that film, famous film. And this was the last Jewish resistance, the Zealots. There are some connections, archaeological connections between this and Masada. And in AD 73, the Romans conquered Masada. And they fell. Masada fell. That is the last Jewish resistance they had. And except for 3 people, all others committed suicide, killed themselves. They thought that is better than falling into the hands of the cruel Romans. Even if this battle had another phase, that also was lost. What I was trying to say is that there is no justification why war scroll can be used within a eschatological framework. That's what I was trying to establish. That may be true for Mayan calendar. That may be true. Next year you can get a Mayan scholar who will who will talk about that. I am not an authority to talk about. Now I come to the second part of the lecture. That is, the question is why a community's failed hopes of winning a battle against their enemies continue to tickle our imagination, apocalyptic imagination. That's what I would like to do now. One reason is the worldview of the Western civilizations. I said I'm bringing 3 experiences. One is my own academic and partial spiritual bringing up in a Western culture, and one of an Indian. North America and Europe is generally has a linear view of history progressing from A to B. And this is in contrast to a cyclical worldview of the Eastern religions, particularly of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and I cannot talk about Shintoism and Confucianism. Now, what is this cyclical worldview of history? In this worldview, there is no end to history. History repeats, it goes in a cycle. History repeats itself, and there is no room for apocalypticism in that history. There is no climax to history. History repeats. And all that salvation is when a soul, not a community, not a church, escapes this circle or cycle you want to call, cycle, and get absorbed into the Parabrahma, the eternal principle whom we call God. That is salvation. You know the cycle, you go in the cycle. You may, if you are a good person, in the next birth you may go to a higher rung of the evolutionary ladder. The highest you can go is to be a Brahmin, the highest caste in Hinduism. Okay. From there, if the Brahmin doesn't do good, he may incarnate as a frog or a roach or something like that later, to be trampled upon by somebody else, to be reincarnated again as an elephant or a tiger or something else. But this, you can escape from this cycle of birth and rebirth. So it's a cyclical view of history. But Western civilizations has a linear view of history. However, it is not just Western civilizations that hold a linear view of history. It is common to Judeo-Christian religions, Judaism and Islam. So we have to ask now, why they don't share a catastrophic end to history? Jihad is not about end time. Jihad is in the present. Why Judaism doesn't have an end time? They have an end time prophecies, but they don't have a catastrophic end. Now, what about Catholics and Orthodox? Though they have their view of history is linear, they don't have a sort of endism which Left Behind series or these channels proclaim. The Catholics, Orthodox are representatives of Eastern and Western Christianity. Though there is an expectation of Christ's return in both traditions, there is no pronounced catastrophic endism in these Christian worldviews. One answer I suggest, or my own inquiry, and I know I am in the lion's den, but I come to present this paper to learn from you. So I would like to have more time for discussion, to share your views. I'm just beginning to write, I'm beginning to explore this part of my paper. One answer I suggest to this question may help us to explain the differing view of historical memory on either side of the Atlantic, that is North America and Europe. It may help us to understand why it is too American than European. The American historical imagination has a definitive terminus acquo, that is a starting point. It's a definite starting point the historical memory has, which makes the historical imagination more forward-looking. They know where it all began. American historical imagination know where it exactly began, and it's now all that you have to do is to move forward, think forward. For then, on the other side of Europe, where the historical imagination is both direction, it is linear, it's fascinated by the past, particularly the pre-Christian past. So the imagination of American past is cast in millennial terms, and this makes the future too to be cast in millennial framework. That's what I'm submitting. The new lands and its opportunities led the early settlers and Puritans to understand their experience in apocalyptic terms. The excitement of being in a new land flowing with supposedly milk and honey led them to consider the role in the light of biblical prophecies and extended it to apocalyptic limits. Scholars like Pauline Moffat Watts traces this history far beyond Puritan fathers to Christopher Columbus. Columbus's view of himself, and the newfound lands had millennial overtones. In his journal he wrote, quote, "God made me the messenger of the new heaven and the new earth, of which he spoke in the Apocalypse of St. John. And he showed me the spot to find it, where to find it." This is what Christopher Columbus wrote in his journal. According to Daniel Wojcik, the millennial understanding of American history, expressed using biblical imageries, particularly that of prophetic literature, continued in the Puritan writings. The Puritan settlements were conceived as communal millennialist prototypes. We are living in the millennium, established in anticipation of Christ's second coming. Some writings we would even go to say that America is the new Eden, paradise on earth. So when the American mind traverses its step back, it reaches a definite starting point, which is cast in millennial framework, cannot go beyond, behind it, further behind it. However, that is not the story of European imagination. This explains why it is more pronounced in the consciousness of American people than the Europeans. Now, let me just highlight something about the European historical imagination. Europe is in a pre-Christian period now. Sorry, post-Christian period. Christianity is almost over. It's living in a post-Christian era. And America probably moving towards that. Now, in this post-Christian Britain and Europe particularly, they have this nostalgia for the past, especially the pre-Christian past. And that is discoverable, is undated. Each new stone the archaeologists dig out tells the story of their past. You know, you have the hench stones and things like that. So there is a movement towards paganism, witchcraft, wizardry in European culture, going to the pre-Christian traditions, which was allegedly suppressed by Christians. That is where Europe. So there is a to B journey in the American mind. A is the settlers, Columbus, forward to a catastrophic end. But in British, the A is not certain. We are exploring, still exploring. And in this exploration, they are traversing through the territories of witchcraft and occult and all that. Let me tell you two examples. I was in London, I was in Oxford, and then in London in June, the third week of June. I walked to a Christian bookstore, and I saw a man in a strange dress with a strange wand in his hand and all sort of things. And I asked, when that man left, I wanted to take a picture of him. But I didn't know what he will do. He looked very eerie look to me. And asked the manager, stayed back and asked the manager, who is this guy? And he said, he's a wizard. Walking in the streets of Wembley, London. And I said, how does he make money? He makes money by gambling or something like that. He doesn't know. But he's a public figure. He walks around. And he has a black cat also he carries around with him. It takes me to the Harry Potter film, as if I was in the Harry Potter film. Now, the college, the university where I studied, it was a secular university, Labour University, University of Sheffield. We had Christian Union, the equivalent of InterVarsity Fellowship here. And also, next to the Christian Union, we had the Pagan Society as well. And they had equal number of members, the Pagan Society in British University. Now, if the collective conscience of a people is reflected in the popular literature, then I have a case to prove. Take, for example, Harry Potter. Harry Potter series began to appear just 2 years after Left Behind series started rolling out of America. 1995, Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, I think, yes, they started publishing the 16 series, books of Left Behind. And in 1997, June 30th, the first Harry Potter book came out. And this is from Britain, the other side of the Atlantic. If collective consciousness is reflected in the popular literature, I would say here you have two cases. Left Behind, the representative of the American imagination looking forward to a catastrophic end. Harry Potter, the same period from the other side of Atlantic, going back to occult. You know what is I'm talking about Harry Potter, right? Yeah, occult and wizardry and all that. Two cultures. Now, my point is not to say that Americans were not interested in Harry Potter. No. The 400 million copies were sold. J.K. Rowling sold 400 million copies, and it was translated into 67 languages. Whereas Left Behind was sold only 40 million copies, mainly in America, was only translated in 2005 in Chinese and 2006 in Japanese, only one volumes each. That's all. Nobody was interested in Left Behind outside America. I mean, generally saying. The question is, though the American self-imagination is colored by millennial dreams from its beginning, it need not propose necessarily a catastrophic end to history. That is not how Columbus looked at it. That is not how the Puritan writers looked at it. The millennial dreams of the early American mind was mostly post-millennial, in contrast to a pre-millennial of the end-time prophecies who capture American imagination now. How did this turn out to be a pre-millennial, confrontationist, catastrophic imagination? Or put in other words, how did it transform itself to a vision of history where some will be left out, some will be blessed, the end of the world will be violent and catastrophic? How did that happen? Now probably I should explain some of these terms, amillennial, post-millennial and premillennial, before I go further. Amillennial takes biblical references to the millennial reign of Christ as figurative. And the millennium reign takes place right now in the hearts of the people. That is the position that, as far as I know, Church of God holds. Now, post-millennial stance emphasizes a gradual progress of human society to a millennial state and the return of Christ subsequent to that. This position considered the evils of society as hindering the return of Christ. Example, slavery, alcoholism, child labor. This is how they look at it. Until this has been transformed until Christ comes. This vision was the vision of the early Puritans. The millennial reign has begun and we are waiting for the coming of the Lord anytime. Be ready. The pre-millennial approach is colored by Calvinistic predestination doctrine, and I would like to say some early writers also had Calvinism in their thinking. It assumes that at least some part of the society are unredeemable and destruction is the only solution. The imminent coming of the Lord is the only solution to the problem of the world. Prior to the coming of Christ, Christians will be persecuted, the Antichrist will be defeated, Christ will come, but a final battle with Satan is due, and the millennial reign of Christ which will be established when the dead will rise, and the last judgment, the creation of the new heaven and earth, and it goes on like that. 3 millennial views. Now back to the question. How did a millennial imagination a post-millennial imagination, take a turn toward a specific pre-millennial vision where apocalyptic events, violence, war were anticipated and even justified? My inquiry takes me to the theological movement called dispensationalism of John Nelson Darby in the 19th century. Now, John Nelson Darby was an Irish Catholic priest who joined the seminal Christian Brethren movement in England. And he is considered to be the founder of the Christian Plymouth Brethren movement. And he published his Bible, new translation of his Bible, where he laid out the history of the world in dispensationalist schema. And in this, he took Bible as inerrant. It's a good thing. Inspired, inerrant, literally. But the thing is that he is the founder of dispensationalism. But dispensationalism gained currency through the Niagara Bible conferences that began in 1875 onwards in America. Now this offered, until Darby, there was no doctrine of rapture in